She was barefoot, bleeding, and clutching a baby as she vanished into the desert. No food, no water, just fear and a name she couldn't say out loud. Everyone in town called her a sinner, a liar, a disgrace. But what they didn't know was what their beloved preacher did to her behind closed doors, and when a stranger on horseback found her half dead beneath a broken tree. Everything changed. Because she wasn't running from shame. She was running for her daughter's life. And when the truth came out, the whole town finally had to face what they'd tried to bury. The town of Cypress Ridge was already baking under a cruel July sun when Evelyn Harper slipped out the back door of the boarding house, her baby bundled tight to her chest. The infant, Grace, was barely 2 months old, wrapped in a faded blue quilt, sleeping fitfully against her mother's heartbeat. Evelyn didn't look back. She couldn't. The morning train had just blown its final whistle. Townsfolk were already gathering at the churchyard for Sunday service. No one saw her sneak down the alley. No one called after her. And if they had, she wouldn't have stopped. Not this time. Her boots were too big, second-hand and splitting at the seams. Her palms were raw from the day before, when she'd worked double shifts scrubbing floors at the saloon to buy baby formula. The money had been taken from her by the house matron for safekeeping. Evelyn had taken it back, along with 2 canteens and a map torn from a travel guide. She had just enough supplies for 3 days, if she rationed everything and nothing went wrong. But things had already gone wrong. Back in Cypress Ridge, they whispered about her, said she'd gotten trouble on her own, said she was a scandal, a stain on the good name of the town. They didn't know the truth, or worse, they did, and they turned away anyway. They let a man like Reverend Harlan hide behind holy words while Evelyn carried the consequences of his lies. When she first found out she was pregnant, she had gone to him, trembling, terrified, begging for help. He'd promised support. Then, the next day, he'd told the church board she was unstable, promiscuous, a risk to the congregation. In less than a week, she was fired from the school. Her boarding house tripled her rent. No doctor in town would take her. Grace had been born in silence, in a dark back room with no nurse, no husband, no family. Just Evelyn, and pain, and love. Now, the desert was her only hope. She had heard of a ranch 3 days west, across the sandstone bluffs, a place that sometimes took in women like her. She didn't know if it was real, but it had to be, because the only other option was surrendering Grace to the same people who had tried to take her away. And that was never going to happen. With the sun rising behind her and the world she once knew shrinking in the distance, Evelyn set out into the wasteland with cracked lips, shaking legs, and fire in her chest. One way or another, she was getting her baby to safety, even if it killed her. By the end of the first day, the sand had swallowed her footprints. Evelyn's legs burned. Her arms ached from holding Grace. Every half-mile she stopped to adjust the baby's position in the sling she'd stitched from an old bedsheet. The quilt kept slipping. The sun kept rising. And the world around her became nothing but heat waves, brittle brush, and silence so thick it pressed on her ears. Grace cried, then whimpered, then went quiet. That silence terrified her more than anything. She tried singing, her voice dry and hoarse. Lullabies she barely remembered from her own childhood. Just to remind the baby she wasn't alone. Just to remind herself. She hadn't seen a tree in 6 hours. Just rocks, sagebrush, bones. A hawk circled high above. The water from the second canteen was already gone. She'd poured the last few drops onto a clean rag and pressed it to Grace's lips. The baby sucked at it weakly, then whimpered again before drifting into a shallow, uneasy sleep. Evelyn knew she had made a mistake. She should have waited, found a better plan, taken a different route. She should have. A sharp cramp seized her side and dropped her to her knees in the sand. She gasped, clutching the baby tight, shielding Grace from the impact. Her chest heaved, her eyes stung. This wasn't noble, this wasn't brave, this was desperation, raw and stupid and human. But still, she didn't cry. She wouldn't cry. She stood back up. She walked. And when her knees buckled again, she crawled. By nightfall, the stars blinked cold and cruel above the horizon, and she collapsed beneath the skeletal shadow of a dead juniper tree. She pulled Grace to her chest, wrapped her in the last dry corner of the quilt, and whispered, "Mama's here, baby. Mama's right here." Then she closed her eyes and waited for either the cold or the dark to take them both. She never heard the horse. Wyatt Garrison had ridden that trail 100 times. He wasn't the law, not anymore. Just a weathered man with a scar on his jaw and too many ghosts behind his eyes. He lived alone now, by choice. Folks said he'd fought in the border wars, came back different, quieter, slower to trust, faster to draw. But one thing about Wyatt, he noticed things. That night, he noticed something that shouldn't have been there. A shape beneath the stars, huddled against a rock. Still. Too still. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching in the dry dirt. He moved quiet, like a predator. What he found stopped him cold. A woman. Young, sunburnt, barefoot, barely breathing. And in her arms, a baby. The child's chest was rising, but only just. Its lips were dry, skin flushed with fever. The woman's head lolled sideways, cracked lips whispering something over and over like a prayer. He crouched beside her, heart pounding. "Ma'am," he said, softly but firm. "You hear me?" She didn't answer. He pulled his canteen, tilted a trickle of water onto a kerchief, and touched it gently to the baby's mouth. The infant twitched, sucked. That was enough. He looked back at the woman. "You're gonna be all right. I've got you." Her eyes fluttered open, brown, wild, searching. My baby," she croaked. "She's safe. So are you." Then, without waiting for permission, he slipped his arms beneath her, one under her legs, one behind her back, and lifted her like a rag doll, the baby he cradled with his free hand against his chest. The stallion didn't flinch as Wyatt climbed back into the saddle, woman and child in his arms. He didn't know her story, didn't ask. Out here, you didn't need a name to know someone was running from hell. Evelyn woke to the crackle of a fire. The first thing she saw was the ceiling, low, wood-beamed and glowing orange in the lamplight. The second was Grace, bundled beside her in clean linens, her cheeks no longer fevered, her breaths soft and steady. She was alive. A breath escaped her chest, half sob, half prayer. "You're safe," came a voice. Low, steady, male. She turned her head. A man sat across the room, sharpening a knife slowly by the hearth. Not threatening, just methodical, like he was passing time with a task his hands remembered. His eyes flicked to her face, brown, watchful, worn. "You passed out," he said simply. 3 miles from nothing. Baby was burning up. She tried to sit up. Pain lanced her side. She winced. He was there in a second, steadying her with one hand. Strong, calloused, but careful. "Don't rush," he said. "You're safe now." That word again. Safe. Evelyn looked around. The cabin was small but solid. One room, a cot, a table, Shelves lined with jars and tins. A saddle hung by the door. His coat on a nail. She swallowed. "Where are we?" "My place," he said. "North side of Lone Butte. Name's Wyatt." She stared at him, waiting for the questions. Where were you going? Why were you in the desert? Whose baby is that? But he didn't ask. He just said, "You hungry?" And for a moment, she didn't know how to answer. It had been so long since someone offered something without demanding something else. "Starving," she whispered. He handed her a tin cup of broth, warm, salty, real. As she drank, her body finally relaxed, just a little, and tears she hadn't allowed herself in weeks welled in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Wyatt gave a slow nod, then returned to his seat, blade scraping gently along the whetstone. Still no questions. That terrified her more than anything, because deep down, she knew the moment she told him the truth, everything might fall apart. It took her 3 days to say his name. On the first, Evelyn slept. Her body was broken from the heat, her mind heavier than sleep could fix. Wyatt stayed close but didn't hover. He watched Grace while Evelyn rested, changed her, fed her sugar water until the baby's cries grew stronger. Not once did he ask questions. On the second day, Evelyn tried to leave. She stood in the doorway at dawn, baby in her arms, shawl pulled tight, the desert wind tugging at her hair. Wyatt didn't stop her, but she didn't take a single step. She turned back around, walked to the table, sat down, and said quietly, "They said I tried to ruin a man." Wyatt didn't flinch. Evelyn looked at her hands, trembling around the mug he'd handed her. "Reverend Harlan, he's not who he pretends to be. He forced me, then told the whole town I was lying. The church, my job, my own sister. They all believed him." Wyatt said nothing. "I stayed quiet for months. Then I showed them the baby, and everything got worse. Said she was born of sin. Said I was trying to slander a man of God. That I was dangerous." Her voice cracked. "They said I'd never raise her right. That they'd take her." Wyatt stared into the fire. "And you ran." "I had to." Now he looked up. "No, you didn't run." She frowned. "You carried her. That's not running. That's surviving." The words struck deep, deeper than she wanted to admit. Evelyn dropped her gaze. Her throat tightened. "There were others," she said finally. "Girls who left town, quietly. Some didn't even get to say goodbye." Wyatt's eyes darkened. "Names?" She hesitated. "You believe me?" "I've seen men like him before," Wyatt said quietly. "They hide behind pulpits, behind badges, behind money. Doesn't make them clean." She nodded slowly. That night, Wyatt saddled his horse and headed toward Cypress Ridge. He didn't tell her what he planned to do, but she knew, because some men dig graves, and some come back to uncover them. Wyatt Garrison rode into Cypress Ridge like a man with a purpose and no patience for pleasantries. He didn't carry a rifle slung over his shoulder or wear a star on his chest. What he carried was worse, the kind of truth towns like Cypress Ridge spent years burying beneath stained glass windows and gossip. He started with the old mail clerk, a man too tired to lie and too bitter to protect anyone. A few quiet questions turned into a reluctant confession. Yes, letters from other girls had come, but none had ever reached their families. Yes, some were addressed to the church. Yes, Reverend Harlan had picked them up himself. Next was Clara Downing, the midwife who'd left town 2 years back under suspicious moral conduct. Wyatt found her name on a forgotten bill of sale from the church treasury. He followed her trail to a ranch north of the county line, and found a woman worn down by silence. Clara cried when Wyatt said Evelyn's name. "You mean she's alive?" she whispered. "And the baby too?" Wyatt nodded. "But they won't be if that man's allowed to keep walking free." She gave her statement in writing. 3 pages, everything she knew. Then Wyatt turned back. When he arrived in Cypress Ridge again, it wasn't with a gun. It was with proof. He walked straight into the sheriff's office, dropped the documents on the desk, and stared the lawman down. "This ain't a rumor," he said. "This is a pattern. This is a man using God's name to destroy girls who couldn't fight back." Sheriff Bowen, to his credit, didn't argue. He read every word. Then he reached for the arrest papers. Reverend Harlan was pulled from the pulpit the next morning, right in front of the choir and the folding fans. The congregation gasped, some shouted, but others? They looked away, ashamed. Outside the church, Evelyn stood on the wooden steps with Grace in her arms. She didn't flinch when the Reverend saw her. She didn't speak when he tried to. She simply turned away. And that, more than any testimony, more than any sheriff's badge, is what broke him. Justice has a weight to it. Not just the kind stamped on court documents or signed by sheriffs, but the kind that lingers in a woman's bones long after the shouting stops. Evelyn didn't celebrate when they took Reverend Harlan away. She didn't cry, didn't speak to the crowd gathered outside the jailhouse. She just went back to Wyatt's cabin, held Grace close, and watched the desert sky bleed into twilight. But word spread fast. Some folks treated her like a hero, nodding in town, leaving bread on the steps. Others crossed the street. The same women who once looked through her like she was glass now whispered behind fans and wagged their heads like it was all too ugly to speak of out loud. Evelyn felt it every day. The aftertaste of being doubted, the echo of the silence she'd endured for too long. She thought about running again. Wyatt saw it in the way she packed up her things without folding them, how she looked at the map pinned to the barn wall like it offered something gentler. One night, she stood by the fence, Grace asleep on her shoulder, staring out at the stars. "You gonna leave without saying goodbye?" he asked behind her. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "You're raising her. You're healing." Evelyn gave a tired smile. "You think people are gonna forget?" "No," Wyatt said. "But Grace will grow up knowing her mama didn't let lies win, and she'll stand taller because of it." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because the next morning she unpacked her bag, slowly, intentionally. And when Wyatt came back from town, he found her planting tomatoes out front, dirt on her hands, the baby cooing beside her in a laundry basket. She wasn't running. Not anymore. Summer bled into fall. The air softened, the dust settled, and Cypress Ridge became a little quieter. Not because the story was forgotten, but because people finally learned to live with the truth. Evelyn stayed. Not because she had to, because she chose to. The cottage behind Wyatt's cabin grew into a home. She painted the door soft blue, grew herbs in the windowsill, put up shelves with her own hands. Wyatt built a chicken coop and taught Grace to hold baby chicks without squeezing. The girl squealed with delight, her curls bouncing, her giggles full of a life that once hung by a thread in the desert wind. Evelyn wrote every night. Some of it was for Grace. Some of it was just to remember who she used to be, and who she never would be again. One evening, as the sky turned gold over the ridge, she and Wyatt sat on the porch, boots kicked off, Grace asleep between them. They watched the wind move through the prairie grass, quiet and slow. "She'll ask someday," Evelyn said softly. "About where she came from. About what happened." Wyatt nodded. "And you'll tell her?" She looked at him. "I'll tell her the truth, but I won't let it define her." He gave a half smile. "Then she's going to be all right." Evelyn reached over and took his hand. Not out of need, not out of fear, but out of peace. "I think we both are," she said. In the distance, the bell of Cypress Ridge rang out over the fields. But out here, on their land, beneath their sky, it felt like nothing more than a sound carried on the wind. No longer a sentence, no longer a warning, just a bell. And a beginning. The road she had fled now ended here. Not in fear, not in silence, but in something hard-earned and stronger than stone. A life that couldn't be taken, a daughter who would never be hidden, and a love that never asked her to be less.